Okay, so Daisy is here, so let's start our class. We are a few minutes behind our schedule. So,
Sorry about that. I was looking for the Zoom link and I couldn't find it anywhere.
that's okay, no
Hello, everybody. Zooming away.
problem. Okay, welcome to our weekly session of Interfaith Explorations on Spiritual Literacy, which is a program of the Interfaith Center located in Little Rock, Arkansas. My name is Sophia Said. I'm your host and also the Executive Director of the Interfaith Center. Since these classes are recorded, I would like to request you to keep your mics on mute unless you are participating in the class. And all the recordings are available on our YouTube channel. Our classes are informed by the work of Frederick and Marianne Broussette on spiritual alphabet. Our letter of the day is Y for you. Along with me is Dr. J. McDaniel, my friend and facilitator for these classes. Let me see if I can spotlight you. Oh no, that was me, sorry. Okay, found it. So Jay has taught world religions at Hendrix College for over 30 years before retiring last year. He is a philosopher, a theologian, and author of numerous books and articles. He is an active voice for process philosophy. What I love about Jay, among many other things, is that he specializes in interreligious and intercultural dialogue and spirituality in this very, very age of consumerism that we are living in. And along with Jay, our guest speaker of the day is Daisy Khan, which we are very, very fortunate to have. Daisy is an award-winning speaker, author, social justice warrior, interfaith activist, commentator. She is the founder of Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality. Her organization actually amplifies women's voices at all levels of political, economic, religious discourse and social discourse. She has had several honors and awards given to us for promoting women's rights and enhancing interfaith relationship. I had the honor of meeting Daisy in 2018 when we invited her to Little Rock, Arkansas to speak at our Central Arkansas Library Systems Literary Fest. And she spoke about her spiritual memoir, Born with Wings, and which is exactly what we'll be focusing on today as well. So to start the class, I would say that I would start with this saying of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And the saying goes that one who knows himself knows his Lord. One who knows himself or herself knows his or her Lord. So this saying of the Prophet establishes an enormous responsibility on knowing and reflecting upon oneself in order to deepen our relationship with God Almighty. But at the same time, it also highlights the beauty and the uniqueness and the love and all that is good and inherent in human soul. And it's an invitation and an opportunity for us to explore that beauty within our own selves. So that is our letter of the day, Y for you. And I'm going to ask Jay to speak a little bit about the letter of the day before we listen from Daisy. So Jay, you're on. If you can introduce the letter.
Sophia, you said everything that I would want to say, and you said it. I'll speak only to those. I know that there are some among us who, when you grew up, if you were shaped by a religious tradition, in my case, it was Christianity, you got a signal that the most important virtue is loving others. But sometimes that was sacrificing yourself in order to love others. So in Christianity, there's an enduring theme called self-sacrificial love. And I grew up thinking that that was the highest virtue. And then I met some people whom I realized, and many were women, for whom that was not the problem. The problem was not that they thought too highly of themselves and they needed to lower the ego level. The problem was that they didn't think highly of themselves enough. So for them, the gospel of self-sacrificial love was not really good news. It was bad news. It was bad news unless complemented with the idea that you are beautiful too, and you count too, and you can stand up for yourself too. You're not one over many, but you're not one under many. You're one among many. And a beautiful one, as Sophia says. So I had to learn that as a person of privilege, a male. Yeah, I think maybe my problem was too much ego, probably still is. But some people's problem is not that at all. It's too little ego. It's not enough self-appreciation. So, wise for you. Why is the capacity not only to know yourself, but to say yes. Yes to your gifts. Thanks for letting me utter that word. We're looking forward to hearing from you, Daisy Khan. So please take over.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, Sophia, for inviting me. And I have very fond memories of Little Rock, Arkansas. It was actually my very first book reading on a book tour when we used to do book tours. Remember that? That was like, feels like a century ago. So my life started a little dramatically, and it really started when I was born, and something an incident that occurred later on in my life where I was told about my birth story, which I didn't know. I was running around celebrating my birthday, and an aunt came over to me and said, "Why do you celebrate your birthday with such pomp and show?" And I said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "Well, because don't you know what your real birthday was like?" So that, it gave me pause. And of course I ran to my mother and I said, "What happened on my birthday?" And she said, no, we love you. And she tried to calm me down, but the kind of girl that I was, I demanded more. And then I was told the story that I was born premature to a mother who was barely 19. I was a third daughter. And there were some people that felt that, another girl, another, mouth to feed, what a burden she is going to be on her father. And so because I was premature, I was left to fend for myself. And while my mother was weak and could not lift me. And so then the story goes that my grandfather, who was an educated man, he had gone all the way to Harvard, he had come back, he was an engineer, and he was also a self-taught Islamic scholar because at Harvard, he had gone into the library and discovered everything he needed to know about Islam. So he walked into the household and he said, "Why is this household in mourning? This is an extended household in Kashmir, in northern part of India, tucked under the, foothills of the Himalayas." So he walked in and he said, and somebody said, "Well, Halima gave birth to a third daughter." And so the story goes that my grandfather was so angry and upset, he rushed up the stairs and burst into the birthing room, which was highly inappropriate, and said, "Where is the baby?" And then he lifted me up in his cashmere shawl, didn't care whether I was wet or naked, and then said, "She is a gift of God. You are a gift of God. And you will be treated the same way as everybody else in this household." So that gave my mother so much confidence. And since then, I used to be carried on his shoulder just to make a point to everybody in the household that I was not to be diminished in any way, that I was not to be seen as a burden, because the Quran says, are you going to kill your children because you think you can't feed them? So everybody is born with their own destiny, and ultimately God is the one that fends for you. So therefore, that was my birth story. And so I, knew that I had my grandfather's back. Of course, I was a little girl. And then there was this incident that took place that was also a very important incident in my life, which I have very vivid memories of. And I was standing in the front lawn of my house, literally a little girl, and I was crying and weeping. And my father walked up to me with a pair of boxing gloves, and I'm showing this to you because this is exactly what they looked like. Had white laces on them. They were almost as big as me, and I was a little girl, and he was dangling them. And I don't remember that at all, but I remember that memory. So I asked my father years later, I said, did you ever give me a pair of boxing gloves? And I didn't think he would remember. And he said, yes, I did. I said, why? He said, because you were the third of 3 daughters and people were bullying you. And I wanted you to learn. I wanted you to learn how to fend for yourself. And he was a sportsman. And he said, and if necessary, punch them in the face. And so I came into this world kicking, screaming, but every time there were people in my life that gave me confidence, that made me feel like I had a rightful place in this world, and that, you know, I needed to assert myself, and that they had given me the permission to do that. And this is important because, you know, young girls are always look up to their fathers as a you know, ideal archetype of a leader. So when a young girl at such a young age is really empowered by the male members of a family, it's already accepted that you will be empowered by your mother and your grandmother. But when a father and a grandfather takes on that role, it shapes your destiny, and it shaped my worldview. And it's why I fight for women to this day. And it's why my boxing gloves come out every time I feel like I have a massive fight on my ends. So I went to school in Kashmir. And although I was born in a primarily Muslim, you know, 100% Muslim household, I was sent to a Catholic school. And because those were the missionary schools. And in that school, you know, my teachers were Hindu. The nuns that taught us, you know, our ethics, the foundations of our moral ethics, were Irish nuns. You know, I played with Sikh girls, you know, climb mountains with them and trees, and we always bought freshwater pearls from Buddhists. And then we were always told that we were from the lost 10 tribe of Israel. I had never met a Jewish person in my life, but just knowing that we had some sort of a Jewish heritage, or genetically we were Jews at some point, that also shaped my worldview about religions. And I never really saw them separately or differently. I just saw them as part of God's plan, this great divine plan, where all of us were kind of in this, you know, the symphony of God's children coming together, celebrating holidays. And because it was such a rich religious environment, you know, we got to celebrate Christmas. So when I came to America and I landed in a Jewish neighborhood, I remember I was so confused. I thought America was a Christian country, and here I had landed in a Jewish neighborhood. And I was like, where are the Christmas carols? Where's the Christmas tree? But, you know, as it happened that I was by nature an artist. And so there were very few opportunities for me as a career woman in Kashmir to be an artist. Art was mostly arts and crafts. And so there was no, you know, contemporary arts didn't exist. There was not a career in the arts. And so my grandfather, who had come to America, decided that you will go to America, he said. You will go to America because it is in America that you will be able to shape your destiny. There is nothing here for you in this place. So I was sent to America at the age of 16. And like I said, landed in a primarily Jewish neighborhood. And in that Jewish neighborhood, I had a deep immersion of the Jewish people, because until then I had met every other world religion, intersected with them, had friends, but I'd never really met a Jewish person. So in Jericho, Long Island, I was the first foreign student, the first Muslim student, the first brown girl, the first everything, first immigrant in that school. And of course, because I was the only one, odd one out, everybody was looking at me and saying, who are you? Why are you so different? And it was my social studies teacher that decided that it was really important for me to speak up for my faith. So he asked me to get up, you over there, get up and speak about Islam. Now, what does a 16-year-old know about Islam in a time when there's no Google, there's no nothing, and there was not that awareness. Islam was always there. We learned our religion through not through going to Sunday schools, but through exemplars. People prayed, we prayed. They fasted, we fasted. They said don't lie, we didn't lie. So there was all taught to us ethically, not in a school per se. And so here I was confused, and that it was the first time I felt that, where is my grandfather? Where is my father? I need somebody to help me. And of course, luckily for me, my grandfather had written a book after he had come back from America called The Kashmiri Muslim. And in there was a section on Islam. And so I lifted the whole thing. And at that point, I felt that I had saw the importance of knowledge as part of developing your own wings where you can fly. And this is why I called my book Born with Wings, because all of us, Rumi says, are born with wings. So why crawl through life? And so the point is, how do we develop our wings? What are our wings? And I've always felt over time, I've developed as a human being, as a spiritual being, I've realized that the more I consume of the knowledge of wisdom that exists within all our faiths, particularly in my own tradition, the more I know, the more and stronger and wider the reach of my wings become. I'm getting more and more elevated because it's the knowledge that is lifting me up. So of course, I went on a career path because I was sent to America to pursue a career, became an architectural designer. And in that process, I was working on the 106th floor of the World Trade Center towers, not at the time when the towers fell, but before that. So I was literally in cloud nine, literally there were clouds hovering over. And when 9/11 happened and the towers collapsed, everything that foundationally I believed in had come down crashing. At least that's what it felt like. Everything that I believed, everything that I had struggled for. And years before that, I had struggled to find my own identity, because some of you who are old enough to remember the Iranian Revolution unfold in our living rooms every single day. For me, I was a young, vulnerable girl who didn't know what to make of it. And I had no one to turn to, no leaders. I was one of those in between generations. And at that time, I, went through the dark stages of my life where I basically had to throw the baby out with the bathwater and distance myself from Islam and distance myself from anything to do with God. And I walked away. And that walking away was the most difficult time of my life, because it felt like I was walking around like this person with an empty hole inside of me, and there was nothing that I could plug that hole with. And then, as fortune would have it, things don't happen when it comes to divine intervention. Things are planned in a particular way. I was working one day very late at night and was about to go to the subway. Car service didn't show up, and I see this sign in a bookstore that I had walked by almost for 2 years, and I had never seen this sign. And I always say that God speaks in neon. There was a neon sign, and it said Sufi books on it. And I remembered Sufi because I remember I came from a tradition of Sufism. Kashmir was very, prevalent with Sufism. And I remember the word Sufi, and I said, what is this? So I walked in very gingerly, and everything that I had been rejecting was there. The Quran was there, the prayer beads were there, the prayer mat was there, the incense, the room full of, green embossed books that I had been so petrified to approach. Everything was there. And it was as if I had just walked in not only home, but I had just walked into heaven. So there I saw these beautiful books inviting me, like the Rumis and the Hafiz and the Khayyams, and it was a bookstore. And I picked up one Rumi book, and then it fell upon this page, that I was looking for God, and I went to the monastery and then didn't find him there. And then it's a long, long poem, but it goes on to describe how I went to a church, a temple, didn't find him there. And then I went to the hills of Kandahar, didn't find him there. I even went to Mecca and didn't find him there. And then I looked in my heart, and there he was all along. So my search for God had been in the wrong place. It was external. And I realized at that moment, that moment that I had spent with my grandfather while he used to do gardening, I remember asking him this question. You know how kids always ask this. While he was gardening, and I asked him, what is God? And he's like, oh, God is, he looked around and he said, God is there. I said, where? He said, God is in the tree. God is in the grass. God is in your dog, Rocky. God is everywhere. He was pointing God everywhere. And then he pointed to my right here. And then he said, God is as close to you as your jugular vein. And reading that Rumi poem that said, God is in your heart and that jugular vein, it immediately connected. And I realized, oh my God, God is inside of me. I don't have to look for God here and there. It's internal to me. And then, of course, that precipitated my desire to know more, to go on this self-discovery that Sophia was talking about. That self-discovery, just getting to know myself. Who am I? Who are you, Daisy? Why are you here? That profound question that we all ask ourselves. And when I began asking that question, I found a mosque that was right next to the bookstore. And I started going to these gatherings, spiritual gatherings, Sufi gatherings. And I discovered very quickly that I was not just Daisy Khan, the career girl, that I was actually a breath of the divine that infused into me, into my little corporal being. God had actually breathed into me of his substance. And then I realized that God had actually breathed into all 6 billion people this of the same substance. And that is what gave us our human equality and our human dignity, the shared divine breath that we have amongst ourselves. And that changed my worldview of how I view people, even people I disagree with, and even people that I think that are on the wrong path. They are still containers of that divine breath. And that divine breath, I, cherished that. And then as I began to evolve more in my faith, I discovered that not only was I part of the divine breath or a piece of the divine breath, I was also an ambassador of God. And this is what my theology teaches me, that I'm a steward of God, that I have been created so godlike, the closest to God, the best of his creation, the most noblest of his creation, endowed by all the faculties that nothing else in creation has been given. And that I have so many of God's attributes. I can kill, I can, give birth, there are so many things that I can do that, that we understand to be God's attributes. And that I have been given that, but I also have been discharged. Now that honor and that ability to think that you are a vice regent of God, that you are actually a walking embodiment of God, and you have to behave like God, and you have to be an ambassador of God, and you have to discharge your duty. So then the question is, if I'm here as an ambassador, what is my job? What do you want me to do for you? How do you want me to serve you? And that, of course, eventually led me to realize that I was not created on this earth for just no reason, no purpose, that I had a purpose other than having a career. I needed to do something for mankind and for my fellow kind. And of course, 9/11 had just happened and the towers had collapsed. And I just felt that this is now my charge, my responsibility. I got to step up. I got to do what I can do. America needs me. My people need me. Women need me. I am needed. Corporate America doesn't need me. My people need me. And that was a very easy decision to make, that jump and quit that form a career and start fresh. And because there was all this excitement about what I could envision, I wasn't even scared of the decision. I just accepted it because it was a mandate. I mean, how great is it to be given this charge, or how blessed can you be that God has said, okay, now you're going to do my work. Stop with the corporate America. They don't need you. I need you. So I made myself available, not knowing what I was going to do, because this is not work that I had started with. This was just something that I decided to become a channel, just let things come through me and let me discharge what I can do for you. And that, of course, led me into, all kinds of territories. So I walked in one day in a little church, and I was speaking to a group of people, and there was a little old lady who asked me all the frequently asked questions. And of course, I rattled off all the frequently asked answers, because at this point I had become very good at answering the questions. Like, I'm sure Sophia is saying, yeah, I know what you're talking about. There's all the frequently asked questions, and we know exactly what they are. But then she asked me about women. And of course, I told her 7th century Arabia, women had the right to divorce, they had the right to property, they had the right to inheritance, they got the right to choose their family, their marriage partner. I went on, and then she looked at me and she said, I believe you, dear, but can you tell me why women are being treated the way they're being treated in Afghanistan? And why are women being stoned? And then she kept quiet for a little while, and then she asked me that very profound, life-altering question. And then she said, or just maybe you can just tell me what you're doing about it. And that question really stayed with me, and I realized, what am I doing about Muslim women? I'm living in the most powerful country in the world. I am de facto, an empowered woman. Every man in my family has empowered me. And if I don't step up and do anything about it, then who will? So I found it wise as an initiative to bring women together. And of course, who was the first person that I went to for advice? Was a friend of mine who was a Christian woman who had started a movement called Faith and Feminism, where she had combined the ideals of feminism with women of faith, because women of faith always felt that they had been, somehow left out of the feminist movement. And so I read her book, and I went to her for advice, and her name was Helen LaKelly Hunt. And she said to me, as a single woman, no one's going to listen to you. Why don't you bring Muslim women together and create an institutionalized voice? And only then you can be effective. So this whole notion of bringing women's voices together, that chorus of women, the variety and the shapes of women, because once women come together, amazing things happened. And of course, she pointed me to the suffragette movement, because I had no knowledge of the suffragette movement. I'd come to America too late, didn't know who they were. And in their example, I found a perfect way for me to channel my movement. So I got really inspired by how they had fought for women in this country, for the right to vote, the right to, how they had fought against slavery, and the efforts that they had made using their faith as a basis, not just the Constitution, but as a faith-based movement. So I created a faith-based movement around the globe to bring Muslim women together, so that we could take the big fight out there, because it's a big field out there, and we needed to do it together. So I know that I think my time is winding down, but one of the biggest fights that I had to fight was, I had been dreaming of creating a community center for Muslims, because I had been an architectural designer and was married to an imam, and both of us together wanted to create this wonderful, community center for Muslims, sort of akin to like a YMCA and a JCC combined. And we had gotten a lot of support from our interfaith allies and communities that we had worked with for years. And then we bought this little dilapidated building that was nothing to speak of, you know. It was a bargain price for Manhattan. Bought it and then created these wonderful drawings of what this thing would look like. It was 13 stories. It would have one space for prayer and the rest of it would be a souk and, you know, lecture series and swimming pool. And like I said, bringing the JCC and YMCA together and combining it, cooking classes. And then we proposed it, and overnight it became a controversy. Like, it became a sensational controversy. Some of you must have heard about it, the Ground Zero Mosque. It became the Ground Zero Mosque. And people began to lead this movement against us. And the most hurtful thing was when I heard somebody say, not you, not here, and not now. As an American, that really hurt. And then I remember somebody telling me, a rabbi telling me, are you going to continue this fight? Are you going to do the good fight? And I said, well, it is exhausting. You know, it's not a nice place to be when you're receiving death threats and emails and, you know, letters, handwritten letters with all kinds of profanities. And you're being confronted by that, and people are telling you, no, you are this is wrong. You can't do this. And then he said to me, he said, you know, the fight that you're fighting right now is a fight that you're fighting with people who are behind you. And then he reminded me of how Jews had to fight the same fight, that Catholics had to fight the same fight. And he said, behind you are Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists and all these other people who are coming. So continue the good fight. So I took out my boxing gloves again, because my father had said, it's time to fight. And I fought the big fight. We never really built a center because it affected our ability to do fundraising. And people were scared, and the project got so misconstrued in the press, so misconstrued that we don't know what it would take to explain to people what the project really was about. And so, you know, some of the people who came out at that time, we thought they were a small group, but it turns out that there are many people like that all over America. And you know, who are denying other people the right to build their mosques. And it's happening nationwide. So ours was the first. And then there were subsequent projects in Nashville and in, you know, all kinds of places where people were using the same template that the group had used against us to basically get some people in their community to put out flyers into their mailboxes, to scare off people, and to say that this mosque is going to be a hotbed for some kind of activity which you cannot afford to have in your own neighborhood. So that is not just my struggle, it's a struggle of an entire people. And it's the struggle of America ultimately, because we all know that we are struggling with, you know, redefining equality in this country, equality of faiths, equality of people, including citizenship, like who are we as Americans? And where does our equality come from? And I just wish I could take this idea of bottling this notion of our human equality and where it really stems from, that we all believe that we're created in this divine image. And so that's where it comes from. And then the rest of the diversity that we have, we should enjoy that. And it's part of God's plan. It's part of the divine plan. So with that, I will conclude. There's so much more to say and so much more to speak about, but you know, I would love to maybe engage with you over a Q&A. So thank you so much.
So we would like for you to talk for another 3 hours. Is that okay?
It would be great if we could, but.
No, thank you so much. And let's open it up. And who's got questions or comments to get the conversation started? Anybody that wants to get started can do so.
Everybody's on mute.
Yeah.
If you're saying anything, I can't hear you.
I think Dana has a comment or a question. Go ahead, Dana.
Oh, well, I think about your path, which is an amazing story. It's a wonderful story. And all the places where that story could have gone differently. It's not so much a comment as to say to the degree that you have taken those things and pieced them together, the revelations, is just, it's marvelous to me, and a real inspiration to me. They were not lost on you anywhere along the way.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just want to know, where do you go when you get such a disappointment as not being able to build the mosque?
Yeah. So, you know, I have become increasingly, I tend to go back into history to draw inspiration from great luminaries of the past and how do they deal with these kinds of things. Because if I try to solve it myself, it becomes very difficult because it feels overwhelming. Even what's happening in this country right now. But if you look at the arc of history and you say, what did people do in the past when it came to this kind of issue? And there is a very beautiful story about the prophet who, while he was a prophet, and he was changing the status quo, and there were, people who were trying to assassinate him. But there was one incident, a story that I always keep in my mind, where he was walking and there was this woman who was throwing entrails of garbage on him every time he walked by the alleyway, because she was really angry with him that he was changing the status quo. And he had become so accustomed to it that he would duck and he would know exactly when the window would open. And then one day he was walking and there were no entrails, there was no garbage. So he said, oh, where is she? And then another day he walked by and he didn't see her. And he said, inquire about her, find out what's happened to her. And of course they did. His companions were really surprised. They were like, oh, so they found out that she was sick. And he said, I'm going to visit her. So then he goes and he visits her and she's so shocked. She said, Muhammad, I've been throwing garbage at you for so long. How can you come and visit me? He said, well, because God has instructed me to visit those who are sick. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just coming to visit, to check on you, see how you're doing. She was so moved by that action that she decided that she was going to become his follower. And so I put myself as the ideal, like when I'm confronted by opposition, I'm like, would I ever go forgive these people? Well, the least I can do is not fight them, right? So I want to aspire to be prophetic-like, to look at all of our prophets who have come before us, and each one of them has struggled so much, right? It feels to us like our struggle is so great, but when you look at what they had to go through, the enormous challenges they had to go through, so that puts my own struggle into perspective, and that gives me even more, conviction that I must stay the course and do whatever I can do within my limited power to affect the change that I can affect.
Jane first.
Thank you for your answer.
I just wanted to comment that I'm a 70-year-old, 2-year-old, and that, I've glided through life without a lot of complexities, although I've had complexities. But as into my 50s, I was aware of people's angst and fear of Muslims in our country. And I'd scratch my head and think, why? And it was bothersome to me, but I kind of like, it's not interrupting my world. But as I get older, I'm much more aware of the pain and suffering and the anger and the meanness of these thoughts and thinkings about religions and Muslims, and it's just heartbreaking to me and profoundly disturbing. And to hear you, Daisy, today is, I'm grateful. Thank you for talking and sharing.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think the answer is that a lot of people are in a state of ignorance. And
Yeah.
they don't know, so fear comes from the unknown. But when you meet somebody, you know, face to face or Zoom to Zoom, and you hear from them directly, and the fear of that person goes away. And that's why I think it's so important that interfaith relations be developed between people. Because while we were going through that controversy and people were attacking us, guess who was circling the wagons around us? It was the interfaith community. It was the Methodists, the Lutherans, the Jews of all spectrum. They were the ones who were holding the vigils for us. And sometimes I didn't even know what was happening. Years later, I would see things in the news, or I would read in the news, and I would say people going out on the limb and fighting for us. And because they said, no, 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 this is not going to happen to you, because this has already happened to us before, and this can't be repeated. So, so these relationships that we are building, these collaborative relationships that we are building, are not only form trust between the leaders, but they are also very important for people who are the followers of those traditions. Because when the leaders speak out, and when the leaders collaborate, and when the leaders do what they need to do, then the congregations also follow course. So you can see what's happening in our country right now with leadership. And leadership is so important. It's so important that God even decided to appoint leaders as prophets. He could have sent the books in some other way, but he chose leaders, a person, somebody to lead and show people by example. So leadership is so important, and educating people and revealing the truth and sharing the truth is critical. Just the other day, I was asked to speak to a high school group. Now, normally I would have gone and spoken and taken a long trip and spoken to, 30, 40 kids. But because of the pandemic, the school district decided they were going to bring all the schools together, because now everybody could be on Zoom together. So there were 450 kids in the Zooms, and I had to do a number of sections because the classes weren't at the same time. But what was fascinating was the testimonials we got from these kids. They were ninth graders. And just as you mentioned that, religion or Islam has such a bad rap, these kids were writing, these religions are so cool. And it was not only a presentation on Islam, it was a presentation on all religions. And they were like, I'm going to study religion now. I really like religion, or religions are fun, or religions have so much in common. It's just, the feedback was so different. Now, if these kids had not received this rich presentation where practitioners of the religion themselves were presenting this, they wouldn't have had this nuanced understanding, this rich understanding. And I think this is where our work is now. And we can do this on Zoom. We can do this to a larger groups of people.
Sally, you got a comment?
Oh, I was just going to suggest we might build that community center and the arts center and the swimming pool and all of that. Could we do that in Little Rock?
Why not? Why not? Little Rock is not a bad place to do it. It's a beautiful place. I like it.
Daisy, you have spoken to some of the conflict that you faced from those outside of your tradition. I would be interested in, as a woman organizer within the Muslim community, what kind of conflict have you had to deal with within your own tradition?
That's a very important question, because most people don't realize this, but Muslims are confronted from both sides. So externally, there are a pushback externally because of all these reasons: lack of information, ignorance, anger, fear, whatever. And so we're always on the defensive, fighting that big fight. But internally, because we are always busy defending, we don't have enough time and energy left to really fight the good fight internally, which every religion has had to fight. right? So we are confronted by so many issues that are so global, so vast, so varied, because we don't have that central authority, that we don't have the centralized voice, we don't have a way to cull information together. So all of the efforts are very localized and very much even socialized in different ways. So my biggest issue was, how do we confront this issue of extremism within our community? And so first you had kind of the denial, it doesn't exist, like we are seeing right now, the stages of denial, in America, like some people who just deny the fact that the election went in a certain way. It's a real thing. People's psychologies can, prevent you from accepting reality. So there was that moment of denial. So years went by when there was denial, like it doesn't exist. It's a whatever, somebody else did it. And because there was a denial, we didn't know the enemy from within. We couldn't identify the enemy from within. We didn't know what they were doing. We didn't know how they were manipulating minds. Like we have right now in America, a lot of white supremacist groups that are confusing the general public. Forget about their own groups and their own groups. They are going after the vulnerable, those people who are afraid that white people are going to be a minority. They're going after that vulnerability, that very delicate vulnerability. So similarly, within the Muslim community, ISIS just came out of nowhere and just basically exploded because they, were able to manipulate many people. So then I thought, I realized that I had to take out my boxing gloves again, but I was going to do things a little differently. So this is what I published: Wise Up, Knowledge Ends Extremism. It's a book. It's 365 pages of a book that describes, and this is the best part of the book, it's like the truth and the fake stuff. So the fake stuff is actual stuff from ISIS. This is what they say about jihad. This is what Muslims believe about jihad. So I pulled all of this research together and put in a book form and have distributed this widely within the Muslim community. It has been recognized, it has been accepted, and it has been appreciated. So because I just said, enough, we got to do this, because too many Americans were saying, where are the Muslims and why aren't they speaking out, right? Isn't that the question you always heard? So now I tell people, we've spoken, it's all here. If you want to know what we think, how we think, and how our faith is being weaponized, it's there. So similarly, there are a lot of issues with Muslim women, as there are, issues with women in all faiths that also need to be addressed. So in about maybe another month or two, God willing, I will be publishing a brand new book called 30 Rights of Muslim Women. And you will enjoy reading it because you are faith-based people. You will be able to skim through it like, just because it's from the Quran, it's based from the Quran, the stories are the same. And so it's my way of addressing this issue of Muslim women, what they can and cannot do, and once and for all, put it all in one place and say, this is what God says, and this is what man did. And God says this, and so therefore we have to lift the truth that God has said, and this is how God sees women, and this is how man is portraying woman. So it's two very, we're going to separate that out and amplify that. So to conclude, the best way that I can fight within the Muslim community, the big fight, is by basically using my scripture and using the tradition from within which translates very well to Muslim ears. So this 30 Rights of Muslim Women book will be used in Afghanistan because Taliban is coming back and they don't have any rights for Muslim women. And so, but they have said that if you can prove that Muslim women have their rights in Islam, then we will give them those rights. So that's why we are rushing and crashing the book, so that we can show that this is what Islam says about, this is what the Quran says about women's rights. So therefore, there's no denying or obfuscating the truth. So this is how I do it. And because it's so research-based, it's so thorough, I have to be better than any other scholar because I don't want anybody pushing back on the scholarship. Because it's done that way, I get very little pushback from the community.
Kitty, thank you. Kitty, you had a comment, and then I want Sophia to say a word as well before we close. Kitty?
Yeah, thank you, Daisy, so much for coming and telling your story. You had mentioned one thing about hearing from the actual practitioners of something, and I think that's so important that we don't get our information about any group from somebody who's not in that group, who really just, it's like secondhand, third-hand, made-up stuff. I really want to hear from someone who embraces that tradition. And at the same time, it's so important that everyone is an individual. And so your journey is a little different from Sophia's journey. And we don't want to say, oh, well, all Muslim women feel this way. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you.
Daisy, when you shared, I remember the community center. I remember that well, reading about it and wondering about it from a distance. When you described that community center, that's how that's what I understood the Medina Mosque in Little Rock to be as well. Yes, a place for Muslims to worship, but for all kinds of things to happen. Sponsored by Muslim, but not excluding others in many of the events. And I want to say what a beacon of hope that is. And that there would be community centers, may that be. And I do hope that your dream continues in some way. We need that. We all need that. With that, Sophia, would you say a last word and thanks to Daisy and close us out?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, Daisy, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you. I hope you'll visit us again. You continue to inspire so many girls and women around the world, and women like me who wanted to build a mosque, who conceived and worked on who conceived the idea, worked on the project, who faced all the opposition from inside and outside the community. But they were able to do that because they had your example and they had courage from people like you. So your dream lives and your legacy lives through women like me who were able to build the mosques that they wanted to build and who will be building mosques in America. So thank you so much for being you. That means a lot. I want to remind the whole class that next Wednesday, the 25th, we will not be meeting because of Thanksgiving. Our next class session is on December 2nd, and I will be sending the reminders via email, but please do make a note of that. And as always, not always, mostly, I do want to end on a short poem today from Hafiz, who has been a magnificent friend to my soul, like many other around the world. It's a short one. I'm going to read it and then we'll close the class. I know of beauty that no one has ever known. How could that be possible when I'm so new in this infinite time? It is because God belongs to only you. Did you hear that? Did you really hear what Hafiz said? God belongs to only you. It is the only reasonable explanation. It is the only reasonable payment for being you and only you. God belongs to you. Thank you all. Have a blessed holiday. I will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.